Do you ever wonder why some old cartoons just disappeared? Not faded away, not rerun, just gone. The 1960s were wild, and animation back then had almost no rulebook. Creators pushed ideas that confused parents, annoyed networks, and made broadcasters panic. Halfway through this list, things get so strange you'll wonder how any of these shows made it on air at all. And the last few? They vanished for reasons nobody expected. Number 15. The Banana Splits Adventure Hour, 1968. At first glance, this show looked harmless. Bright colors, loud music, costumed characters running around like a live-action cartoon fever dream. But behind the smiles, the Banana Splits Adventure Hour quietly became one of the most complained-about kids' programs of its era. Parents said the show felt overwhelming. The scenes cut too fast. Jokes landed without setup. Characters shouted, laughed, and broke into songs with no warning. To adults, it felt chaotic. To broadcasters, it felt risky. Child development experts at the time warned that the show's rapid pacing and non-stop noise could overstimulate young viewers. That word started appearing in letters sent to networks. Overstimulating. The bigger issue was structure, or the lack of it. Segments jumped from live action to animation to skits without clear transitions. Kids loved the madness, adults did not. Several local stations quietly moved the show to awkward time slots. Others dropped it entirely. What makes this ban especially weird is that nothing in the show was truly offensive. No bad language, no dark themes, just pure sensory overload. But networks decided it was safer to pull it than explain it. Ironically, that strange energy is exactly why the show is remembered today. What once felt like chaos now feels like early experimental television. Too loud for its time, too strange to last. Number 14. The Adventures of Gulliver, 1968. This animated adaptation of a classic story seemed safe on paper. A traveler, tiny people, big lessons. But The Adventures of Gulliver ran into trouble almost immediately once it aired outside the United States. The problem was interpretation. European broadcasters began noticing how the show portrayed leadership, obedience, and authority. Gulliver was always right. The tiny societies were always wrong. Their leaders were foolish. Their systems failed. Only the outsider could fix things. During a tense political era, that message raised eyebrows. Some networks felt the cartoon pushed a simplistic view of power. Others worried children were being taught that strength automatically meant wisdom. Complaints came in, not from parents this time, but from cultural review boards. The show wasn't officially banned everywhere. Instead, it was quietly pulled from rotation in several countries. No press release, no announcement, just gone. In the United States, it continued airing with little noise. Overseas, it became controversial. That split response is what makes this case so strange. Same cartoon, same episodes, completely different reactions. Today, surviving episodes circulate online, mostly watched by adults curious about forgotten animation. What once caused quiet concern now feels like a time capsule, a reminder that context can matter more than content. Number 13. Space Ghost, 1966. Space Ghost looked like a superhero cartoon, but it didn't feel like one. The tone was heavier. The villains were stranger. The stakes felt bigger than most children's animation of the time. Parents noticed something unsettling. Characters didn't always bounce back after danger. Monsters didn't crack jokes. Scenes lingered on tension longer than expected. Some children found it thrilling. Others found it frightening. Local stations began receiving complaints that the show felt too intense for younger viewers. Not graphic, just serious. Broadcasters responded by pulling certain episodes or limiting airtimes. In a few regions, Space Ghost vanished entirely. What made this ban unusual was the lack of a single trigger. No one scene caused the issue. It was the mood, the atmosphere, the sense that the show trusted kids with emotions networks weren't comfortable handing them. Decades later, that seriousness became its legacy. The show is now praised for treating its audience with respect. But in the 1960s, that approach made executives nervous. Sometimes being ahead of your time doesn't get applause. It gets pulled off the schedule. Number 12. Fantastic Voyage Animated Series, 1968. Based on a popular science fiction concept, Fantastic Voyage followed characters exploring the human body in animated form. It was meant to be educational. That was the pitch. Learning through adventure. But viewers had a different reaction. Parents wrote in saying the visuals made their kids uncomfortable. Organs were personified. Environments felt strange and unfamiliar. The show explained complex ideas in ways that confused rather than clarified. Broadcasters worried the cartoon crossed an invisible line. Educational content was fine, but turning the inside of the human body into an adventure setting unsettled some audiences. Several stations stopped airing reruns. Others quietly removed it from weekend blocks. What makes this case odd is that the show was never accused of being inappropriate, just unsettling. Too real in places, too abstract in others. Today, the series is praised for ambition. Back then, ambition made networks nervous. The result was a quiet disappearance that few noticed until years later. Number 11. The Mighty Heroes, 1966. This cartoon wanted to be funny. Loud costumes, overconfident heroes, exaggerated action. On every episode leaned into parody, but the humor came with a cost. Parents complained that the heroes solved problems by causing even bigger messes. Buildings collapsed. Scenes escalated quickly. Consequences were played for laughs. Networks began questioning what message that sent. Children were copying catchphrases and exaggerated movements. Teachers mentioned it in school meetings. Broadcasters responded by pulling the show from certain time slots, then entire regions. What's strange is that The Mighty Heroes wasn't darker than other cartoons. It was just louder, more frantic, less thoughtful about cause and effect. That made it uncomfortable for networks trying to appear responsible. Today, the show is remembered as harmless fun, but in its moment, it felt like too much energy without enough breaks, and that was enough to sideline it. But number 10, Lancelot Link, Secret Chimp, 1969. This one sounds like a joke, a chimp spy solving global problems. Bright suits, goofy expressions, laugh track energy. But Lancelot Link, Secret Chimp ran into serious trouble for reasons nobody expected. The issue wasn't the animals. It was the message underneath the fur. The show parodied intelligence agencies during a time when global tension was very real. Every mission ended with chaos. Authority figures looked foolish. Plans failed in spectacular ways. To adults, it was satire. To networks, it felt risky. Some broadcasters worried kids would absorb the idea that leadership was pointless and systems never worked. In a decade built on trust in institutions, that rubbed executives the wrong way. Complaints didn't come from parents alone, or they came from sponsors and affiliates who feared backlash. Several international broadcasters refused to air it altogether. Others aired a few episodes and quietly dropped it. No big announcement, just silence. What makes this ban strange is how subtle it was. Nothing loud, nothing shocking, just discomfort. The show laughed at things networks didn't want laughed at. Years later, the cartoon is remembered fondly for its absurd humor, but at the time, that humor felt a little too close to home. Number 9. The Adventures of Superboy, 1966. Superheroes were everywhere in the 1960s. Capes, confidence, clear heroes. But The Adventures of Superboy hit an unexpected wall. The concern wasn't action. It wasn't intensity. It was independence. Superboy solved problems alone. Adults rarely helped. Authority figures stood aside. Some broadcasters worried the show encouraged kids to act without guidance. That may sound mild now, but at the time, it mattered. Parent groups argued the show blurred lines between imagination and responsibility. Kids wrote letters saying they wanted to fix problems themselves, just like Superboy. Networks panicked. Several stations pulled the show from weekday slots. Others removed it completely, not because it was dangerous, but because it felt too empowering in the wrong way. That's what makes this case unusual. The cartoon didn't break rules. It questioned them. Today, that independence feels inspiring. Back then, it felt uncomfortable. The show faded quietly, remembered mostly by collectors and fans digging through old schedules. Sometimes being too confident is enough to get pulled. But number 8, Hot Wheels, 1969. This one didn't disappear because of story or tone. It disappeared because of paperwork. Hot Wheels was fast, flashy, built around racing excitement. Kids loved it instantly. Parents noticed something else. Every car on screen looked exactly like the ones in stores. Advocacy groups accused the show of being disguised advertising. Broadcasters denied it. Then documents surfaced showing episodes were planned alongside toy releases. That changed everything. Regulators stepped in. Stations were warned. The show was pulled almost overnight. What makes this ban strange is that the cartoon itself wasn't the problem. It was the strategy behind it. Hot Wheels became a landmark case that reshaped children's television rules. The irony is sharp. The controversy made the toys even more popular. Kids wanted what they couldn't watch. The show vanished, but its impact stuck around. It quietly changed how cartoons were made forever. Number 7. Rocket Robin Hood, 1966. This show looked like a space adventure, but watching it felt like stepping into a dream you couldn't quite explain. Rocket Robin Hood jumped from idea to idea with no warning. Villains appeared without reason. Solutions made no logical sense. Dialogue drifted into strange phrases kids repeated at school. Teachers complained. Parents worried. Psychologists warned that the show confused cause and effect for young viewers. Broadcasters began pulling episodes. Some regions dropped the series entirely. What makes this ban so odd is that the show wasn't aggressive or dark. It was just incoherent, too experimental for a time that wanted clear lessons. Though today, fans celebrate its surreal charm. Back then, it felt like television losing control of itself. Networks didn't want that reputation, so the show disappeared, leaving behind only fragments and stories. Number 6. The Adventures of Pow Wow, 1960. This cartoon didn't last long, and for good reason. The Adventures of Pow Wow arrived with a confident promise. It claimed to teach children about history and culture while wrapping those lessons in colorful adventure. Networks promoted it as harmless learning. Parents were told it was informative. That reputation collapsed almost immediately. The problem wasn't subtle. The information presented was inaccurate, oversimplified, and often completely wrong. Traditions were blended together. Timelines were ignored. Ideas were treated as facts without care or context. Unnative groups noticed right away and responded fast. Letters were written. Phone calls followed. Concerns were raised not about tone, but about truth. Broadcasters were caught off guard. They had trusted the educational label without checking the details. Once complaints became organized, stations reacted quickly. Some pulled the show after only a handful of airings. Others quietly removed it from schedules and never mentioned it again. No public defense was offered. No explanation was given. What makes this ban so unusual is the speed. Most cartoons fade slowly. This one vanished almost overnight. It barely had time to establish an audience before it disappeared. Today, the show is studied as an example of careless storytelling, a reminder that good intentions mean very little without proper research. Once trust is lost, or there is no easy return. Number 5. The Funny Company, 1963. This show started with good intentions. That's what makes its disappearance so uncomfortable. The Funny Company was pitched as a celebration of togetherness, a group of kids from different backgrounds working and learning side by side. On paper, it sounded forward-thinking. On screen, it felt awkward almost immediately. Characters were defined by exaggerated traits. Their personalities weren't shaped by choices or growth, but by surface-level shortcuts. Parent groups noticed. Advocacy groups noticed even faster. Letters poured in, not angry at first, just concerned. Viewers pointed out that the show simplified complex identities into easy jokes. Networks struggled to respond because the show claimed to promote unity. That contradiction became the problem. Show stations began dropping episodes quietly. Others stopped airing it altogether. There was no dramatic cancellation, just a slow fade into silence. What makes this ban strange is how sincere the creators seemed. They believed they were helping. But television doesn't judge intent, it judges impact. Today, the show is remembered less for what it tried to do, and more for how quickly it revealed the limits of early television awareness. Number 4. Sinbad Jr., 1965. This cartoon didn't just upset parents, It caught the attention of people far outside television. Sinbad Jr. reimagined a classic adventure story in a modern setting. Bright colors, friendly side characters, simple plots. But its depiction of regions and cultures raised concerns almost immediately. Broadcasts overseas triggered strong reactions, and leaders worried the show painted entire areas as foolish or backward. Complaints didn't stop at the network level. They moved higher. Behind the scenes, conversations happened that never made headlines. Broadcasters were encouraged to pull the show to avoid international friction. That alone makes this case unusual. The cartoon wasn't loud. It wasn't shocking. It was simply ill-timed. After one season, it vanished. No reruns. No revival attempts. The studio distanced itself completely. Sometimes a cartoon disappears not because of ratings, but because it becomes inconvenient. Sinbad Jr. didn't fail creatively. It failed diplomatically. Number 3. The Beagles, 1966. At first, it felt playful. Musical dogs, catchy songs, a clear nod to popular music trends. But the Beagles crossed a line many parents noticed instantly. Background jokes hinted at adult lifestyles. Scenes felt coded in ways children didn't fully understand, but adults did. That gap caused panic. Religious mentions were avoided in public discussions, but community leaders raised concerns about influence and messaging. Stations in several regions pulled the show after just a few episodes. Then came legal trouble. Music rights issues piled on top of parent complaints. Networks didn't wait for a final decision. They walked away. What makes this ban strange is how quickly everything collapsed. The show didn't get time to adjust or correct course. Today, surviving clips feel tame. But in its moment, the Beagles felt like television pushing too far, too fast. For number 2, Batfink, 1966. A superhero bat with metal wings sounds harmless, and for a while, Batfink was exactly that. Bright colors, simple heroes, easy laughs. It fit perfectly into the loud, confident world of 1960s television. Then viewers started noticing patterns. Characters weren't just silly. They were built from exaggerated traits that leaned a little too hard in one direction. Villains spoke in ways that felt familiar for the era, but uncomfortable even then. Jokes brushed up against global fears that adults were already carrying with them every day. One episode referenced atomic anxiety in a playful tone that landed badly, especially with parents who remembered drills and warnings from real life. Complaints followed, not all at once. Slowly, networks hesitated. Its affiliates began pulling certain episodes while keeping others. In some regions, the show vanished entirely, while in others it lingered in reduced form. What makes this situation unusual is intent. Batfink was never trying to shock or provoke. It simply reflected the humor and assumptions of its moment without stopping to question them. And that became the problem. As public awareness grew, tolerance shrank. What once passed as harmless suddenly felt outdated. Today, the show isn't celebrated so much as examined. A reminder that humor doesn't age evenly, and context can change faster than animation ever expects. Number 1. Courageous Cat and Minute Mouse, 1960. This cartoon vanished for one simple reason. It made adults uncomfortable. Courageous Cat and Minute Mouse arrived at a time when children's animation was expected to be loud but safe, exciting but controlled. This show quietly ignored that balance. The heroes didn't struggle. They overwhelmed. Problems weren't solved through patience or clever thinking. They were crushed quickly, decisively, and without much reflection afterward. At first, nobody objected. The tone felt familiar. Fast pacing, big reactions, bold confidence. But repetition changed how it landed. Parents began noticing how intensely the heroes behaved. Teachers reported kids reenacting scenes on playgrounds, mimicking gestures and attitudes rather than story lessons. It wasn't about harm. It was about imitation without context. Broadcasters reacted slowly. Episodes were moved. Time slots shifted. Then, without announcements, episodes stopped appearing altogether. No official ban, no public statement, just quiet removal. What makes this case so strange is that the show never crossed a clear line. It didn't violate standards. It revealed their limits. It showed what happened when energy outweighed consequence. When Courageous Cat and Minute Mouse disappeared, it left behind gaps in schedules and questions in memory. That absence gave it power. Because when something vanishes without explanation, it stops being just a cartoon. It becomes a legend shaped by silence. So the next time someone tells you old cartoons were simple and harmless, remember this list. These shows didn't vanish by accident. They pushed boundaries before anyone knew where the lines were. Which one surprised you the most? Which feels unfairly forgotten? Drop your thoughts below. Share this with another animation fan, and subscribe if you want more stories hiding in television's forgotten corners. Some history doesn't disappear. It just waits to be rediscovered.